What's up guys, my name is Ace, and yesterday we got a massive weapon balancing update, and today we're going to be going over all of the details. Some of the highlights of this are the Kar98 got nerfed very slightly, and the grease gun and the SawedOff shotgun got buffs. And let's start it off with the grease gun. I would say this is one of the highlights of this balancing update. If you guys haven't tried the grease gun yet since this balancing update that happened yesterday, make sure you give it a shot. It is so much easier to control, I feel, and it just feels so much better than it used to. So the first thing they did to the grease gun is they made it so the recoil is easier to control. Now when I actually show you my recoil test here, it's going to look a little bit backwards. Pay close attention to how much the gun is bouncing around though. This is the pre-patch recoil test here. So this is what we've had basically since launch, because the grease gun hasn't been touched since launch. And as you can see, it bounces around quite a bit. It's relatively unpredictable, but it doesn't kick up to the sky. It's not too crazy. It stays relatively contained. Now let's have a look at the recoil pattern post-patch. As you can see here, it kicks a lot more vertically, but it's not kicking side to side nearly as often, and it never kicks downwards. As a result, when we compare it side to side and we look at the wall test, you would immediately think, oh crap, it got a huge nerf when it comes to recoil. But if you actually go and use this in-game, it is so much easier to control the recoil with the grease gun because it's a lot more predictable. It's always kicking vertically, and then it just kind of sways side to side very, very slightly here and there. Whereas before, it was kicking up and down and left and right, and it was kind of all over the place, and it was too hard to compensate at those longer ranges. It's much easier to control now. In addition to this, they made an adjustment to the aim down sight time. They buffed the aim down sight time so it's in line with the PPSH, the FG42, as well as the Type 100 at 200 milliseconds. And something that they didn't mention in these patch notes is this also adjusted the sprint out time for the grease gun also down to 200 milliseconds, and therefore it's once again in line with those other three SMGs I mentioned. So this is actually a very, very noticeable buff to the grease gun. You can be much more aggressive with this. It technically has a faster time to kill up close compared to something like the PPSH, and the PPSH is one of the most used SMGs at the moment. So the grease gun is very, very good, very usable, and like I said, if you haven't tried it yet since the update, make sure you give it a go. Moving on to the next gun that got buffed, this is the FG42. Now, if you guys were paying attention a little while ago, the FG42 was very powerful, and they nerfed its rate of fire by 15%, so a very massive nerf, and that pretty much destroyed the FG42. You don't really see it used too much anymore, or at least you didn't before this update. With this update, they bumped it back up just a little bit when it comes to rate of fire, by about 3%. So it went from 441 rounds per minute, it is now currently 455 rounds per minute, keeping in mind that's a hand-tested value. So it's slightly better than it was before the patch when it comes to rate of fire, but they also adjusted the recoil a little bit. Let's have a look at the comparison here. This is the pre-patch recoil, which is not bad by any means. It kicks basically perfectly vertically, very little side-to-side sway. It was pretty easy to control, but now let's look at the post-patch, and as you can see here, it doesn't kick nearly as high as it used to, and it still doesn't kick side-to-side very much at all. So very, very controllable. This gun is a laser beam. All you have to do is pull very slightly down on your analog stick, and you'll stay right on target up to really long ranges. Well, they didn't really buff the rate of fire back up too much. It's not nearly what it used to be when it comes to rate of fire and time to kill. I would say it once again has a place in this game. Now let's move on to the shotguns. So first up, the combat shotgun actually got a very, very slight nerf to its range. As you can see here, this was the combat shotgun at launch. Then we got a buff on December 21st, and it was quite a noticeable buff. It was a pretty significant buff because it took a lot fewer pellets to kill, out to a very impressive range. Sledgehammer felt like they took that a little bit too far, so on yesterday's patch, they decided to bring it back just a little bit, but as you can see here, it was a very slight nerf. They only took off a slight amount. It's still the same number of pellets to kill. It's just the ranges for those are very slightly shorter. So for the most part, you probably won't notice too much of a difference with the combat shotgun. You might run into a few more situations where you get a hit marker where you thought you would have got a one-shot kill, but for the most part, it's still a beastly shotgun. Next up is the SawedOff. Finally, the SawedOff shotgun is getting a little bit of love in this game. It did get a buff, and it was a fairly noticeable buff. Here's what it looked like at launch, and this is what we've been dealing with. It took 6 pellets to kill, even at point blank range, and keep in mind, each shot that you fire only has 8 pellets, so you had to be very precise. Even when you're literally touching the enemy player, it took 6 pellets to get a kill, and the one-shot kill potential was pretty pitiful as well, especially when you compare it to something like the combat shotgun. Yesterday, they buffed it a very noticeable amount. As you can see here, now at point blank range and out to an extended range from that, it only takes 3 pellets to kill, which is the same as the combat shotgun, and that one-shot kill potential has been increased by a noticeable amount. Having said this, I did play several games with this yesterday. I would say this is still far from being a good shotgun. It's just a bit more usable than it used to be. You're still going to run into situations where you get hit markers with it, and also, even if you aren't getting hit markers, you only get 2 shots and then you have to reload the shotgun. Which brings me to the next point. In the patch notes, they mentioned that they increased the reload speed a little bit, and based on my testing here, the actual reload add time, this is the amount of time it takes to reload without any unnecessary animation, is literally 1 frame faster than it used to be, which is negligible. This doesn't make a difference at all. The animation itself is faster and it looks faster, but the practical reload time is essentially exactly the same as it used to be. In addition to this, in the patch notes it said they increased the rate of fire a little bit. This is hardly noticeable because you can only fire those 2 shots, and therefore most of the time I would say this is going to be pretty negligible. In all, I would say the combat shotgun is still clearly superior in basically every situation compared to the SawedOff. There's no reason I would want to use the SawedOff, but having said that, for you camo hunters out there, it's going to be a lot easier now than it was before if you're doing this in core game modes. So finally, let's move on to the sniper rifles in this game. First up, we have the Lee Enfield. The Lee Enfield actually got a little bit of a buff to its aim down sight time, so it aims down sight a bit faster than it used to. And if we look at it side by side here, and I slowed it down as much as I possibly could here, you can see that it aims down sight roughly 2 frames faster than it used to, which is actually quite noticeable to quickscopers out there. So just in case you're wondering, the Lee Enfield now aims down sight faster than all of the other one-shot kill sniper rifles in the game. And this brings us to the final change, and the one that a lot of people have been waiting for quite a long time. The Kar98 got a slight nerf to its aim down sight time. This is actually just the reverse of the Lee Enfield buff. They literally just swapped the aim down sight times for these rifles. So now the Kar98 aims down sight roughly 2 frames slower than it used to, and this is now perfectly in line with the M1903 Springfield. This was a perfect change in my mind. They definitely didn't take it too far to the point where the Kar98 isn't usable and you can't quickscope with it. You absolutely still can quickscope with this gun, but it's going to be a bit more difficult, and it's really going to separate those people that were taking advantage of an easy sniper rifle from the people that are actually good at sniping and quickscoping in this game. I used it a fair amount since this buff, and it felt good for quickscoping. It felt like I was actually deserving those kills a lot more often, and it wasn't just easy quickscopes all the time. In addition to this, I think it totally makes sense that they swapped aim down sight times with the Lee Enfield, because the Lee Enfield has a smaller one-hit kill area, so it makes sense that that one should have a faster aim down sight time than the Kar98 and the M1903 Springfield. Now, one thing to note is there is one particular variant of the Kar98K that is bugged, and it still has the pre-patched aim down sight time, according to reports that I've heard. I don't have this variant, so I couldn't test it myself, but I do hope that gets worked out in the near future, because there are people taking advantage of that, and it's not really fair considering a lot of people don't have that variant. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for all the weapon balancing changes that happened yesterday. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think of these changes that were made? Did they take anything too far? Not far enough? Was there something else you wanted to see changed that they didn't change? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, of course, like I said, if you guys haven't tried the grease gun out yet, give it a go. This is becoming one of my new favorite SMGs in the game. I'm loving it, and I hope you guys do as well. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.